Flashing sirens tore through the quiet sanctity of a millionaire's garage, illuminating a standoff that would soon tear a police department apart. A highly decorated federal official, exhausted from fighting systemic corruption, found herself in handcuffs in her own home. The arrogant patrolman sneered, entirely confident he held all the power. He thought he was teaching a trespasser a lesson. He had no idea every word, every threat, and every violation was being beamed directly to a federal server. Midnight rain lashed against the windshield of the unassuming black Chevrolet Tahoe as it navigated the winding, tree-lined roads of Crestview Estates. Inside the heavily armored government fleet vehicle sat Valerie Stanton, her posture stiff with the unique kind of exhaustion that only comes from 72 straight hours of federal depositions. As a Deputy Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division of the United States Department of Justice, Valerie was no stranger to high-stakes conflict. For the past 3 weeks, she had been buried in a neighboring state, leading a devastating audit of a deeply corrupt Metropolitan Police Department. A department notorious for racial profiling, excessive force, and constitutional violations. She had spent her days dismantling the arrogant defenses of precinct captains, and her nights reviewing thousands of pages of redacted internal affairs reports. Now, finally back in her home state, all she wanted was a hot shower, a glass of expensive Cabernet, and the comfort of her own bed. She wore a faded grey collegiate hoodie, comfortable denim jeans, and a pair of worn-out sneakers, a stark contrast to the sharp, tailored power suits she wore while tearing hostile witnesses apart in federal court. Crestview Estates was a sanctuary of wealth and quiet privilege. Wrought-iron gates gave way to sprawling, manicured lawns, towering oak trees, and multi-million-dollar custom homes. Valerie and her husband, Arthur, a highly successful commercial architect, had purchased their 6-bedroom mid-century modern home 3 years ago. They were one of the very few black families in the exclusive zip code, a fact that occasionally manifested in lingering stares at the Homeowners Association meetings, though it had never escalated beyond the polite, icy boundaries of suburban passive aggression. Valerie turned the steering wheel, the heavy SUV gliding smoothly onto her private paver-stone driveway. The house was completely dark. Arthur was attending an architectural symposium in London and wasn't due back until the weekend. The sprawling property was silent, save for the rhythmic drumming of the rain against the Tahoe's roof. She reached up and pressed the integrated button on her rearview mirror. The massive insulated double doors of her garage began their slow motorized ascent, revealing the spotless epoxy floor, Arthur's vintage Porsche 911 resting beneath a silk cover, and the glowing blue perimeter lights of her custom-built security array. As she eased the SUV into the bay, a sudden, blinding flash of light exploded in her rearview mirror. Valerie blinked, her eyes adjusting to the harsh glare. It wasn't lightning. It was the sweeping, strobing intensity of red and blue emergency lights. A local police cruiser had pulled directly into her driveway, its heavy push bumper stopping mere inches from the rear bumper of her Tahoe, effectively boxing her in. The cruiser's high beams flooded the interior of her garage, casting long, menacing shadows across the pristine walls. Valerie shifted the SUV into park and killed the engine. Her heart performed a brief, involuntary stutter, a primal reaction to sudden law enforcement intervention, but her training immediately took over. Her pulse leveled out, her breathing slowed. The analytical, razor-sharp legal machinery in her brain powered on. She glanced at the dashboard clock, 12:14 a.m. Through the rain-streaked side mirror, she watched the heavy door of the police cruiser swing open. A tall, broad-shouldered figure stepped out into the downpour. He was illuminated by the strobing lights, a white male officer in a dark blue uniform, his hand resting casually, yet purposefully, on the butt of his holstered sidearm. Valerie knew exactly what this was. She had literally just spent 3 weeks investigating this exact behavioral pattern. It was a classic pretextual stop, heavily flavored with racial bias. An unfamiliar vehicle, driven by a black woman, turning into a multi-million-dollar estate at midnight. In the officer's mind, she was either a thief, a lost domestic worker, or someone who simply didn't belong in his patrol sector. She pressed the button to close the garage door, curious to see what he would do. The motorized door began to descend, but the officer broke into a sudden sprint. He lunged forward, thrusting his heavy black tactical boot directly into the path of the garage door's laser safety sensor. The mechanism beeped sharply. The heavy door shuddered, reversed direction, and rolled all the way back up, leaving the garage completely exposed to the storm and the glaring lights of the cruiser. Officer Gregory Harmon stood in the threshold of Valerie's garage, rain dripping from the brim of his uniform cap. He unclipped a heavy tactical flashlight from his duty belt and shined its blinding LED beam directly through the Tahoe's driver-side window, straight into Valerie's eyes. "Turn the vehicle off and keep your hands on the steering wheel where I can see them," Harmon barked, his voice echoing loudly off the concrete walls, laced with a harsh, authoritative bark that demanded absolute submission. Valerie did not flinch. She did not raise her hands in a panic. She calmly reached over, unbuckled her seatbelt with a deliberate click, and placed both of her hands at the 10 and 2 position on the leather-wrapped steering wheel. The chess match had begun, and Officer Harmon had no idea he was playing against a grandmaster. Harmon approached the driver's side door, his flashlight beam never wavering from Valerie's face. He tapped the heavy metal casing of the flashlight aggressively against the reinforced glass of the Tahoe. "Roll the window down. Now!" Valerie pressed the button. The glass slid down silently. The smell of wet asphalt and ozone filled the cabin. "Good evening, officer," Valerie said. Her voice was remarkably steady, modulated to a perfectly neutral pitch. She offered no smile, but no overt hostility either. It was the exact tone she used when cross-examining a hostile witness. Polite, detached, and utterly unyielding. Harmon leaned in, invading her personal space. His eyes darted around the interior of the expensive, unmarked government vehicle, taking in the sparse, utilitarian setup. No personal items, no trash. Just a mounted encrypted radio system and a heavy steel lockbox bolted to the passenger floorboard. To a trained federal agent, it screamed government fleet. To Officer Harmon, it apparently screamed stolen. "Whose vehicle is this?" Harmon demanded, ignoring her greeting entirely. "This vehicle is assigned to me," Valerie replied smoothly. "Assigned to you," Harmon repeated, a thick layer of skepticism coating his words. He looked past her, shining his light into the cavernous garage, illuminating the covered Porsche and the high-end custom cabinetry. "And what exactly are you doing at this residence?" "I'm parking my vehicle," Valerie said, "because I live here." Harmon let out a short, dismissive scoff. It was a sound Valerie had heard 1,000 times in courtrooms and deposition chambers. It was the sound of entrenched, arrogant disbelief. "You live here," Harmon said, his tone dripping with condescension. "In Crestview Estates." "That is correct." "Let's see your license, registration, and proof of insurance. Hand them over." Slowly. Valerie did not move her hands from the steering wheel. According to the laws of this state, and under the protections of the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, an officer required reasonable, articulable suspicion that a crime had been committed, was being committed, or was about to be committed to demand identification during an investigatory stop. Simply pulling into a driveway did not meet that threshold. "Officer," Valerie began, her voice dropping a fraction of an octave into a more authoritative register. "Before I reach into my pockets or open the glove compartment, I would like to know the legal justification for this stop. What traffic infraction or reasonable suspicion of criminal activity prompted you to follow me onto my private property and block my vehicle?" Harmon's jaw tightened. The muscles in his neck strained against the collar of his uniform. He was not used to being questioned. In his jurisdiction, his badge was an absolute monarchy, and compliance was the only acceptable currency. "I don't have to explain myself to you," Harmon snapped, his hand dropping back down to hover near his weapon. "We've had a rash of burglaries in this neighborhood, high-end vehicle thefts. Now I see a dark SUV with tinted windows trailing through the neighborhood at midnight, turning into a house that belongs to one of the wealthiest families in the county. You don't fit the profile of the homeowners here. Now give me your ID before I drag you out of this car for obstructing a police investigation." Valerie's mind catalogued every single word. Rash of burglaries. Tinted windows. You don't fit the profile. It was textbook profiling. It was exactly the kind of lazy, unconstitutional policing that resulted in multi-million-dollar federal consent decrees. "Officer," Valerie said calmly, "I am the homeowner. My name is Valerie Stanton. The deed to this property is in my name, alongside my husband's. I have not committed a traffic violation. You do not have reasonable suspicion to detain me on my own property. I am asking you to remove your vehicle from my driveway so I can close my garage." "Step out of the vehicle!" Harmon roared, abandoning any pretense of an investigation. His temper had flared completely out of control, ignited by the sheer audacity of this woman refusing to cower. He reached through the open window, his thick fingers grabbing the interior door handle. He pulled it violently, swinging the heavy armored door open. "I'm stepping out of the vehicle," Valerie announced loudly and clearly, ensuring her voice carried. "I'm complying with your physical directive, but I am stating for the record that I do not consent to this detention, nor do I consent to any search of my person or my property." "Save the sovereign citizen legal crap for the judge," Harmon sneered, stepping back just enough to let her out. Valerie stepped down from the SUV. Standing at 5'9", she was tall, though still dwarfed by Harmon's bulky frame. She kept her hands clearly visible at her sides. "Turn around and face the vehicle. Put your hands behind your back," Harmon ordered, unclipping his handcuffs from his belt. The metallic rasp of the steel restraints sounded incredibly loud in the echoing garage. Valerie remained perfectly still. "Officer, you are attempting to place me in handcuffs without probable cause. I am unarmed. I am not a flight risk. I am standing inside my own home. This constitutes an unlawful arrest under the color of law, which is a federal civil rights violation." Harmon laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "A federal violation? What, are you a lawyer now? Turn around before I put you on the concrete." Knowing that resisting a physical arrest, even an unlawful one, on the street often resulted in tragic, fatal outcomes, Valerie made the tactical decision to submit. She knew the battlefield she dominated was the courtroom, not the concrete floor of a garage. She turned slowly, placing her hands behind her back. Harmon grabbed her wrists roughly. His grip was unnecessarily tight, his fingers digging into her skin as he clamped the cold steel cuffs around her wrists. He ratcheted them down hard, pinching her skin. Valerie winced slightly but bit her lip, refusing to give him the satisfaction of hearing her cry out. "You have no idea the mistake you are making," Valerie said softly, her voice barely rising above the sound of the falling rain outside. "The only one who made a mistake tonight is you, thinking you could come into my town and mouth off to me," Harmon whispered back, his breath hot against her neck. He shoved her roughly against the side panel of the Tahoe. "Stay right here. Don't move." Harmon stepped back, pulling his radio mic from his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Unit 41. I have one detained at 742 Oak Creek Drive, requesting a secondary unit for transport. Subject is uncooperative and combative. I'll be conducting a probable cause search of the vehicle." Valerie stood facing the sleek black paint of her SUV, the cold steel of the cuffs biting into her wrists. Despite the physical discomfort and the deep, burning indignity of the situation, a profound sense of calm washed over her. She wasn't looking at the paint of her car. She was looking at her own reflection in the glossy surface, and specifically at the reflection of the upper right corner of her garage ceiling. Tucked discreetly behind a structural beam was a small, high-definition camera. It was part of a $40,000 SCIF-compliant, sensitive compartmented information facility, security suite installed by federal contractors when she took the Deputy Assistant Attorney General position. Because she frequently worked with classified grand jury materials from her home office, the DOJ required a localized security perimeter that recorded everything within a 50-foot radius of the property line. The system didn't just record to a DVR in a closet. It encrypted the audio and video in real time and beamed it continuously to a secure, partitioned AWS GovCloud server maintained by the FBI's CJIS, Criminal Justice Information Services Division. Harmon wasn't just violating her rights in the dark. He was doing it live on a federal uplink. The small blue light on the camera blinked steadily, a silent, unblinking witness capturing every constitutional violation, every threat, and every agonizingly tight click of the handcuffs. Officer Harmon paced around the perimeter of the government-issued Tahoe, his flashlight beam sweeping over the interior. Finding the doors unlocked, as Valerie had just exited the vehicle, he pulled the rear passenger door open. "Officer," Valerie called out, turning her head as far as she could while remaining pinned against the vehicle. "I am explicitly denying you consent to search that vehicle. You have no warrant. You have no probable cause. Anything you do from this moment forward is an illegal search." "I have probable cause," Harmon shot back, rummaging through the back seat, pulling up floor mats and shining his light under the seats. "You're driving a suspicious vehicle in a high-crime area. You refuse to identify yourself, and you're exhibiting evasive behavior. I'm searching for stolen property and weapons." "Crestview Estates is not a high-crime area," Valerie countered, her voice ringing out clearly, ensuring the overhead microphones caught every syllable. "The statistical crime rate here is the lowest in the county. Furthermore, asserting my Fourth Amendment right not to answer your questions is not, by legal definition, evasive behavior. It is the exercise of a constitutional right." Harmon ignored her, moving to the driver's side door. He leaned heavily into the cabin, his boots scuffing the door sill. He popped the center console open, tearing through the small stack of gas receipts and maintenance logs. Finding nothing, his eyes locked onto a heavy, black leather satchel resting on the front passenger seat. It was a standard-issue government briefcase. Harmon grabbed the handles and hauled it over to the center console. He unclasped the brass buckles and flipped it open. Inside, sitting neatly on top of a stack of sealed, red-stamped federal case files, was Valerie's credential wallet. It was a heavy, dark blue leather bifold. Harmon picked it up. He flipped it open, illuminating it with his tactical light. On the top half of the wallet was a shining, solid gold Department of Justice shield. On the bottom half was Valerie's federal identification card. It featured her photograph, stern and professional in a navy suit, set against an intricate holographic background. The text read clearly: Valerie Stanton, Deputy Assistant Attorney, General, Civil Rights Division, United States Department of Justice. Harmon stared at the credentials. For 5 long seconds, the only sound in the garage was the rain falling outside and the low, heavy hum of the Tahoe's cooling engine block. Valerie watched Harmon's reflection in the window. She saw his shoulders tense. She saw the microscopic hesitation as his brain attempted to process the information in front of him. A normal, rational officer would have immediately realized the catastrophic error they had made. They would have uncuffed her, apologized profusely, and prayed she didn't ruin their career. But cognitive dissonance is a powerful drug, and Officer Gregory Harmon was deeply addicted to his own authority. His prejudice simply could not reconcile the reality in his hands with the narrative in his head. To him, federal prosecutors were old white men in expensive suits. They weren't black women in faded hoodies driving home in the middle of the night. Harmon let out a low, humorless chuckle. He stepped out of the vehicle, slamming the door shut with a violent bang that echoed like a gunshot. He marched over to Valerie, holding the open credential wallet inches from her face. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous, accusatory whisper. "The Attorney General of the United States handed it to me when I was sworn in," Valerie replied, her eyes locking directly onto his. "Bullshit," Harmon spat, tossing the credentials onto the hood of the Tahoe, where they slid slightly on the polished metal. "This is a high-grade fake, and a stupid one, too. You think flashing a fake Fed badge is going to get you out of a burglary charge? Impersonating a federal officer is a felony, sweetheart. You just upgraded yourself from a county jail to a federal penitentiary." Valerie felt a sharp, almost painful spike of adrenaline, not from fear, but from the sheer, astonishing audacity of the man holding her captive. He was doubling down. "Officer Harmon," Valerie said, reading his name tag for the first time, "I highly suggest you run that badge number through your dispatch. Ask them to contact the NCIC database or the FBI Regional Field Office. Tell them you have Valerie Stanton detained. Let them verify my identity. If you do that now, this ends with a severe internal affairs investigation and your likely termination. If you continue this course of action, it will end in your criminal indictment." Harmon stepped right into her personal space. He reached out and aggressively grabbed her by the shoulder, spinning her around to face him. The sudden movement wrenched her cuffed wrists, sending a sharp bolt of pain up her arms. "Listen to me very closely," Harmon growled, his face inches from hers. "You don't give me orders. You don't tell me what to do. I know what you are. You're a thief who got her hands on a fake badge to try and bypass security checkpoints. I'm going to tear this car apart. Then I'm going to take you downtown, book you for burglary, resisting arrest, and federal impersonation. By the time the sun comes up, you'll be locked in a cell, and no amount of fake IDs will get you out." He reached down to his radio again. "Unit 41 to dispatch. Be advised. Suspect is in possession of forged federal law enforcement credentials. Add felony impersonation to the charges. Where is my backup?" The radio crackled. Dispatcher Sarah Jenkins' voice came through, sounding slightly strained. "Unit 41, backup is en route. ETA 5 minutes. Be advised, a supervisor, Captain Becker, is also en route to your location due to the felony impersonation code." "Copy that," Harmon said, smiling grimly at Valerie. "My captain is coming. You're really in for it now." "I'm looking forward to meeting Captain Becker," Valerie said quietly. She shifted her weight, ignoring the throbbing pain in her shoulders. She looked past Harmon, straight up at the blinking blue light of the DOJ security camera. She knew exactly what was happening in Washington right now. When a federal agent's credentials are run through the National Crime Information Center as fraudulent or suspect in custody, it triggers an immediate automated alert at the DOJ command center. The system would cross-reference the NCIC inquiry with the GPS transponder in her Tahoe, confirm her location, and immediately wake up the regional duty agent in charge. Harmon thought he was building an ironclad case against a neighborhood thief. In reality, he was meticulously constructing the very cool boo-boo that was about to trap him forever. Harmon turned his back on her again, walking toward the trunk of the Tahoe, eager to find more evidence before his captain arrived to take the credit. He forcefully popped the rear hatch, rummaging through her emergency road kit, completely oblivious to the digital trap snapping shut around him. Valerie stood tall, the cold rain blowing in through the open garage door, wetting her face. She took a slow, deep breath, mentally preparing for the legal slaughter that was about to unfold on her driveway. 300 miles away, inside the secure, subterranean basement of the FBI Regional Field Office, an automated klaxon shattered the quiet hum of the night shift. Special Agent Richard Hayes, the duty agent in charge, nearly spilled his black coffee over his keyboard. He pivoted his chair toward the primary monitoring terminal, where a massive red alert banner was flashing across the screen. Critical alert. NCIC inquiry match. Status: suspected fraudulent credentials / agent detained. Target: Valerie Stanton, DAAG, DOJ. Civil Rights Division. Hayes's blood ran cold. Valerie Stanton was not just a bureaucrat. She was a highly visible, incredibly powerful federal prosecutor, currently spearheading the largest police corruption probe in the state. An alert like this meant local law enforcement had either run her plates or her badge, and somehow tagged it as fraudulent. His fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard. He bypassed the standard dispatch channels and tapped directly into the DOJ's Joint Automated Booking System and the localized SCIF security feed tied to Stanton's residence. Within seconds, a high-definition, encrypted video feed populated his left monitor. Hayes stared at the screen in absolute disbelief. He saw Valerie Stanton, a woman who had just spent the entire week shredding corrupt precinct commanders in a federal courthouse, standing handcuffed in the rain against her own government-issued Tahoe. He saw a uniformed local officer aggressively tearing through the trunk of the vehicle without a warrant. He saw the flashing lights of the police cruiser blocking her in. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," Hayes muttered to himself, his hand already reaching for the secure red phone that linked directly to the local police commissioner and the FBI tactical response team. "You arrogant, stupid son of a bitch!" He keyed his headset, broadcasting on the encrypted interagency tactical channel. "All available federal units in Sector 4. This is Command. Code Red. I have a confirmed 10:33 at 742 Oak Creek Drive. A federal official has been unlawfully detained and is currently being held at a residence by a local patrol officer. Initiate emergency response. I want that driveway locked down in 5 minutes. No local units leave that perimeter." Meanwhile, back at the rain-swept driveway in Crestview Estates, the wail of approaching swans cut through the storm. A white Ford Explorer Interceptor, bearing the gold chevrons of a shift commander, swerved aggressively into the cul-de-sac. It bumped up onto the curb, parking diagonally across the manicured lawn to block the entrance of the driveway. Captain Robert Becker stepped out of the vehicle. He was a 20-year veteran of the force, a man whose weary eyes had seen every variation of street-level stupidity. He was pragmatic, fiercely protective of his department's reputation, and highly allergic to lawsuits. Becker pulled up his rain collar and marched up the driveway, his heavy boots splashing in the puddles. "Harmon!" Becker shouted over the storm. "What the hell is going on here? Dispatch said you have a felony impersonation and a combative suspect?" Officer Harmon slammed the trunk of the Tahoe shut, puffing his chest out as his supervisor approached. He looked immensely pleased with himself. "Yes, sir, Captain," Harmon said, gesturing toward Valerie, who was still pinned against the side of the SUV, soaked to the bone, but standing perfectly upright. Observed the suspect vehicle trailing through the neighborhood. Conducted a stop when she pulled into this address. Suspect was evasive, refused to identify, and claimed she lived here. During a probable cause search, I found these. Harmon proudly held out the blue leather bifold. Becker took the wallet. He wiped the rain from his eyes and clicked on his own penlight, illuminating the gold shield and the holographic ID card. Silence fell over the garage, heavy and suffocating. Becker did not laugh. He did not scoff. Instead, the color rapidly drained from his face, leaving him a pale, ashen gray under the harsh glare of the cruiser's spotlights. He traced his thumb over the intricate, micro-printed seal of the Department of Justice. He tilted the card, watching the embedded security holograms shift and dance in the light. It wasn't a fake. It was a Grade A, unequivocally authentic federal credential. Becker slowly raised his eyes, looking past the badge and focusing on the woman standing in handcuffs. He recognized her, not from the neighborhood, but from the front page of the State Chronicle 2 days ago. She was the federal hammer that was currently smashing the neighboring city's police force to pieces. "Harmon," Becker whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of raw terror and boiling fury. "Tell me you did not put handcuffs on a deputy assistant attorney general." "Captain, it's a fake," Harmon insisted, his confident smile faltering slightly as he registered the sheer panic radiating from his commanding officer. "Look at her. You think a DOJ's executive drives around in a hoodie at midnight, pulling into Crestview?" "I think," Becker said, his voice dropping into a deadly, quiet register, "that you are the dumbest patrolman to ever wear this uniform." Becker shoved the badge into his own pocket and sprinted toward Valerie. "Ma'am, Miss Stanton, I am so sorry," Becker stammered, his hands shaking violently as he fumbled for his handcuff keys. "This is a catastrophic misunderstanding. I am taking these off right now." "Do not touch me, Captain," Valerie commanded. Her voice sliced through the garage like a freshly sharpened scalpel. Becker froze, the metal key hovering inches from the cuffs. "I have been unlawfully detained, physically assaulted, and subjected to an illegal search of a federal government vehicle," Valerie stated, her eyes locking onto Becker with terrifying intensity. "Your officer explicitly stated he was arresting me. Therefore, I am currently in the custody of your police department. You will not remove these handcuffs until my legal counsel and a representative from the Federal Bureau of Investigation are present." "Ma'am, please be reasonable," Becker pleaded, panic fully taking the wheel. "He made a mistake. A terrible mistake. Let me take the cuffs off. We can step in net, get you dry, and sort this out privately. There's no need to escalate this to the federal level." "Escalate?" Valerie repeated, a cold, humorless smile finally touching her lips. "Captain Becker, your officer didn't just escalate this. He strapped it to a rocket and lit the fuse. And you don't need to worry about calling the FBI." Suddenly, the synchronized roar of heavy engines drowned out the storm. 3 massive, blacked-out Chevrolet Suburbans tore into the cul-de-sac, their hidden red and blue grille lights flashing with blinding intensity. They didn't park politely. They aggressively boxed in both the patrol cruiser and Captain Becker's Explorer, completely cutting off any avenue of escape. The doors of the Suburbans flew open simultaneously. 8 men and women wearing tactical vests emblazoned with bright yellow FBI letters poured out into the rain. They moved with terrifying, coordinated precision, hands resting on their sidearms, instantly securing the perimeter of the property. Special Agent Richard Hayes stepped out of the lead vehicle. He did not look happy. "FBI, everyone keep your hands where I can see them and step away from the federal official," Hayes roared, his voice booming over a portable bullhorn. Harmon stumbled backward, his hand instinctively dropping toward his holster. A fatal mistake born of pure panic. "Hand off the weapon! Do it now!" 3 different federal agents screamed simultaneously, their tactical flashlights pinning Harmon against the garage wall. Harmon threw his hands into the air, his bravado entirely evaporated, replaced by the crushing realization that he had just stepped onto a landmine. Captain Becker stood frozen, his hands raised to shoulder height, looking utterly defeated. Hayes marched up the driveway, his eyes scanning the scene before settling on Valerie. "Ms. Stanton, are you injured?" Hayes asked, his tone shifting from tactical aggression to professional concern. "I'm bruised, Agent Hayes, but otherwise functional," Valerie replied. "I am officially requesting that you document my physical condition, the placement of these handcuffs, and the current state of my assigned vehicle, which has been subjected to a warrantless search." "Consider it done," Hayes said. He turned his attention to Becker. "Captain, remove the cuffs, slowly, and then you are going to hand over that officer's duty belt, his badge, and his body camera." Becker scrambled to comply. He carefully unlocked the tight steel cuffs, flinching as he saw the angry red indentations they had left on Valerie's wrists. Valerie brought her arms forward, rubbing her wrists methodically, her face devoid of emotion. Harmon was hyperventilating now. As 2 FBI agents approached him to strip him of his gear, his survival instinct finally kicked in, demanding he spin a narrative to save his skin. "This is ridiculous," Harmon shouted, pointing a trembling finger at Valerie. She was acting suspiciously. She refused a lawful order to identify herself during an investigatory stop. "I acted within departmental policy based on reasonable suspicion. It's my word against hers, and she was non-compliant." Harmon knew the game. In a standard street encounter with no witnesses, the officer's written report became the indisputable legal truth. He was already drafting the report in his head. Suspect was combative. Exhibited furtive movements, officer feared for safety. He reached down to his chest, his fingers brushing against his Axon body camera. "And unfortunately," Harmon added, a sickeningly slick tone creeping back into his voice, "my body camera battery died an hour ago. We had a faulty charging dock at the precinct. So there's no footage. It's just going to be a misunderstanding." He looked at Captain Becker, practically begging his supervisor to back up the lie. Valerie stopped rubbing her wrists. She stepped forward, closing the distance between herself and the trembling patrolman. "Officer Harmon," Valerie said softly. The garage was dead silent, save for the rain. "Do you know what a SCIF is?" Harmon blinked, utterly lost. "A what?" "A sensitive compartmented information facility," Valerie explained, her tone conversational, yet dripping with lethal intent. "Because of the highly classified nature of my work prosecuting corrupt officers very much like yourself, the federal government requires a highly secure perimeter around my primary residence." She raised her right hand and pointed a single, perfectly manicured finger toward the upper right corner of the garage ceiling. Harmon, Becker, and the FBI agents all followed her gaze. Tucked neatly into the shadows of the crossbeam, The small, unblinking blue LED light of the high-definition camera pulsed steadily. "That camera," Valerie continued, "does not run on batteries. It is hardwired into a localized generator. It records 4K video and highly sensitive directional audio. And it does not record to a hard drive in my house." Harmon's jaw went completely slack. The color drained from his face so fast, he looked as though he might pass out. "It beams directly to a secure server at the FBI Criminal Justice Information Services Division," Valerie said, delivering the final, fatal blow. "Every unconstitutional demand, every racist assumption, every threat of physical violence, every time you unlawfully touched my vehicle. It is all safely stored on a federal server, completely immune to your faulty charging docks or your creative report writing." Harmon collapsed back against the brick wall of the garage, his legs literally giving out beneath him. He slid down until he was sitting on the cold concrete, his hands clutching his head. "You lied about the legal justification for the stop. You committed battery under the color of law. You conducted an illegal search," Valerie listed, her voice echoing with the finality of a judge reading a verdict. "And you just attempted to lie to a federal agent about the destruction or manipulation of evidence regarding your body camera. That is an obstruction of justice charge." She turned to Captain Becker, who looked as though he had aged 10 years in the span of 5 minutes. "Captain Becker," Valerie said, "I suggest you call your chief of police and the mayor. Tell them they have exactly 12 hours to hand over Officer Harmon's entire internal affairs file, his arrest records for the past 5 years, and the dashcam footage from his cruiser. If those files are not on my desk by noon tomorrow, the Department of Justice will place this entire precinct under a federal consent decree by Friday." Becker swallowed hard, nodding rapidly. "Yes, ma'am. I understand. It will be done." Valerie picked up her credential wallet from the hood of the Tahoe, sliding it smoothly into the pocket of her hoodie. She looked down at Harmon, who was staring blankly at the wet pavement, his career, his freedom, and his pension entirely evaporated. "You wanted to teach someone a lesson tonight, Officer Harmon," Valerie said quietly. Class dismissed. Morning arrived with a blinding clarity, washing away the remnants of the midnight tempest, but leaving behind a sprawling, unavoidable catastrophe for the local police department. Inside the heavily paneled office of Chief William O'Reilly, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. The air conditioning hummed aggressively, yet sweat beaded on the forehead of every ranking officer in the room. Captain Robert Becker stood rigidly at parade rest in front of the massive mahogany desk, his eyes fixed on the wall behind the chief, entirely unwilling to make eye contact. Resting squarely on the center of the desk was a towering stack of manila folders, internal affairs complaints, and 3 external hard drives. It was exactly what Valerie Stanton had demanded. Chief O'Reilly, a heavy-set man, whose face was currently a deep, dangerous shade of crimson, violently shoved a coffee mug aside and slammed his fist down onto the stack of files. "Explain to me," O'Reilly growled, his voice a low, terrifying rumble, "how a routine patrol shift in our most affluent neighborhood devolved into a federal hostage situation involving a deputy assistant attorney general." Becker cleared his throat. It felt as dry as sandpaper. "Chief, Officer Harmon initiated a pretextual stop without reasonable suspicion. When the subject, Miss Stanton, exercised her constitutional rights, Harmon escalated to a physical detention and conducted an illegal search of her government vehicle. He ignored her federal credentials, claiming they were forged, and threatened her with felony impersonation. He was completely unaware that her property is classified as a federal SCIF. The FBI captured everything in real time. O'Reilly buried his face in his hands, letting out a sound that was half groan, half sob. A SCIF. He unlawfully arrested a federal prosecutor in a SCIF. Do you understand what the DOJ is going to do to us? They aren't just going to fire Harmon. They are going to dismantle this entire department brick by brick. It gets worse, sir, Becker said, his voice dropping to a grim whisper. O'Reilly slowly raised his head. How, Robert? How could this possibly get worse? Becker reached forward and tapped the external hard drives resting on the desk. Per Ms. Stanton's ultimatum, I pulled Harmon's entire unredacted internal affairs history and audited his dashcam footage for the past 36 months. Chief, Harmon wasn't just racially profiling for low-level drug busts. He was running a highly targeted, systematic civil asset forfeiture ring. The room went deathly silent. Even the buzzing of the fluorescent lights seemed to halt. What are you saying? O'Reilly demanded. Harmon intentionally profiled high-net-worth minority individuals traveling through or residing in our jurisdiction, Becker explained, the sickening reality of his own department's corruption finally tumbling out into the open. He would initiate a stop, manufacture probable cause, and unlawfully search the vehicles. If he found significant amounts of cash, expensive jewelry, or high-end electronics, he would seize them under suspicion of being tied to narcotics trafficking. He never filed criminal charges because he knew the stops were illegal, but the property was funneled directly into the precinct's discretionary slush fund. He targeted people he assumed wouldn't have the legal resources to fight back. Last night, he saw a black woman in a multi-million-dollar home driving a discreet high-end SUV, and he thought he had found his next payday. He just happened to pick the one woman who writes the federal guidelines on prosecuting corrupt cops. O'Reilly stared at the hard drives, realizing they weren't just personnel files. They were explosive devices wired directly to his career and his freedom. If Harmon had been funneling illegal forfeiture money into the precinct's discretionary fund, it implicated the entire command staff. Bury it, O'Reilly whispered, his survival instinct overriding his sworn oath. Scrub the forfeiture logs. Terminate Harmon immediately for insubordination and conduct unbecoming. We hand him over to the feds as a rogue, isolated incident. A bad apple. Chief, you can't be serious. Becker recoiled, his eyes wide with shock. The FBI already has the unedited footage of the arrest. You think Valerie Stanton is going to accept a simple termination? She demanded these files by noon. If we doctor them, we are committing federal obstruction of justice. I am giving you a direct order, Captain, O'Reilly roared, standing up so violently his leather chair crashed into the credenza behind him. You will purge those forfeiture logs, or you will find yourself sharing a cell with Harmon. Before Becker could formulate a response, the heavy wooden double doors of the chief's office swung open. Standing in the threshold was Valerie Stanton. She was no longer wearing the faded grey hoodie and worn sneakers from the night before. She was armored in a razor-sharp, tailored navy blue suit, a crisp white blouse, and a pair of dark leather pumps. Her posture was flawless, projecting an aura of absolute, terrifying authority. Flanking her on either side were Special Agent Richard Hayes and two heavily armed federal marshals. I don't think Captain Becker will be doctoring any files today, Chief O'Reilly, Valerie said. Her voice was smooth, perfectly modulated, and completely devoid of warmth. It was the voice of a predator that had just cornered its prey. Miss Stanton, O'Reilly stammered, all the blood rushing out of his face as he collapsed back into his righted chair. This is a gross breach of protocol. You cannot simply barge into my office. I can, and I did, Valerie interrupted, stepping fully into the room. She walked directly to the desk and placed her hand flat on the stack of manila folders. Because, as of 5 minutes ago, a federal judge signed a comprehensive search and seizure warrant for this entire building. Your precinct is currently being locked down by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Nobody is leaving, no files are moving, and no hard drives are being scrubbed. Agent Hayes stepped forward, handing a thick, freshly printed legal document to the chief. William O'Reilly, you are officially under federal investigation for conspiracy to violate civil rights, systemic corruption, and wire fraud. We are seizing all departmental records, financial ledgers, and digital communications. O'Reilly's hands shook uncontrollably as he took the warrant. His empire was crumbling in real time. You can't do this over one bad traffic stop. Harmon is a rogue officer. Do not insult my intelligence, Chief, Valerie countered, leaning slightly over the desk, forcing O'Reilly to shrink back. I spent the entire night reviewing the encrypted local database access logs. I know about the asset forfeiture ring. I know that Gregory Harmon accounted for 40% of this precinct's discretionary budget through unconstitutional seizures. And I know that you signed off on every single one of those seizures, using the stolen money to purchase military-grade tactical gear and luxury department vehicles. She turned her gaze to Captain Becker. The captain immediately raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. Captain Becker, Valerie said, her tone softening just a fraction of a degree. Last night, you made a choice. You could have backed your officer's blatant lies, but you chose to de-escalate. Today, you are faced with another choice. You can go down with this sinking ship, or you can cooperate fully with the federal grand jury. Becker didn't even hesitate. I'll cooperate. I will give you everything you need, Ms. Stanton. Passwords, safe combinations, off-the-books ledgers. Everything. Traitor, O'Reilly spat, glaring at his captain. No, William, Becker fired back, his own anger finally boiling over. I'm a cop. You and Harmon are just armed robbers with badges. I'm done covering for you. Down in the precinct's heavily fortified holding area, Officer Gregory Harmon sat completely alone in an interrogation room. He was no longer wearing his dark blue uniform, the badge of his perceived absolute authority stripped away. Instead, he wore a bright orange, county-issued jumpsuit. The harsh, unforgiving fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, illuminating the deep, dark bags under his eyes. He hadn't slept a single second. He had spent the last 8 hours frantically trying to reach his union representative, confident that the powerful police union would swoop in, invoke his qualified immunity, and shield him from the consequences of his actions. They always did. They always protected their own. But when the union lawyer finally arrived, he took one look at the federal SCIF footage provided by the DOJ, packed his briefcase, and walked out without saying a single word. Qualified immunity protects officers who make reasonable mistakes in the line of duty. It does not protect officers who maliciously manufacture false charges, commit battery on federal property, and knowingly violate clearly established constitutional rights on high-definition video. The heavy metal door of the interrogation room clicked open. Harmon looked up, expecting to see a local detective. Instead, Valerie Stanton walked into the room, followed closely by Special Agent Hayes. Valerie pulled out the metal chair across from Harmon and sat down gracefully. She placed a single manila folder on the aluminum table. Harmon stared at her, a toxic mixture of hatred and profound fear swirling in his eyes. Without the badge, without the gun, and without the cover of darkness, he looked incredibly small. You think you've won, Harmon muttered, his voice raspy and weak. You think you can just come into my town and ruin my life over a misunderstanding? A misunderstanding implies a mutual breakdown of communication, Gregory. Valerie replied calmly, folding her hands neatly over the file. What happened last night was not a misunderstanding. It was a demonstration of power. You saw someone you believed was inherently beneath you, and you weaponized your authority to terrorize them. You've done it dozens of times before. We have the dashcam footage to prove it. Harmon swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the folder. I was doing my job. I was keeping the streets clean. You were lining your chief's pockets while destroying the lives of innocent citizens, Valerie corrected him, her voice echoing with the weight of absolute truth. You targeted minorities because you believed society would take your word over theirs. You relied on a system that is historically designed to protect the abuser and silence the abused. She opened the folder and slid a single sheet of paper across the table. But you made a fatal miscalculation, Valerie continued, leaning forward. You targeted a black woman who has dedicated her entire life to dismantling the very system you hide behind. I have prosecuted corrupt judges, violent task forces, and billionaire swindlers. Did you really think a racist patrolman in a suburban enclave was going to intimidate me? Harmon looked down at the paper. It was a federal indictment. Gregory Harmon, Agent Hayes spoke up, his voice booming in the small room. You are hereby formally charged by the United States Department of Justice with 1 count of deprivation of rights under color of law, 1 count of aggravated assault, 1 count of evidence tampering, and 1 count of wire fraud relating to illegal asset forfeiture. Wire fraud, Harmon choked out, his eyes widening in horror. You can't prove that. We already have, Valerie said simply. Captain Becker flipped 20 minutes ago. He gave us access to the hidden ledgers. He confirmed that you knowingly falsified police reports to seize cash from innocent drivers, and that Chief O'Reilly knowingly accepted the stolen funds. Harmon felt the last remaining oxygen leave the room. The reality of his situation crashed over him like a rogue wave. He wasn't just looking at a departmental firing or a slap on the wrist. He was looking at decades in a federal penitentiary. Please, Harmon whispered, his previous arrogance entirely shattered, replaced by the pathetic begging of a broken man. Please, Miss Stanton. I have a family. I have a pension. If you take this to trial, I'll lose everything. Valerie looked at him, her expression a mask of pure, unyielding professional detachment. She felt no joy in this moment. There was no triumphant satisfaction. There was only the cold, mechanical process of excising a tumor from the body of public trust. You lost everything the moment you put your boot in the path of my garage door, Valerie said quietly. She stood up, smoothing the front of her jacket. Your trial will be held in federal court. I strongly suggest you retain competent counsel. She turned and walked out of the interrogation room, leaving Harmon alone to face the devastating consequences of his own prejudice. 3 weeks later, the fallout was catastrophic and complete. The local news networks ran continuous coverage of the scandal. Chief William O'Reilly was marched out of his own headquarters in handcuffs, his face shielded by a jacket, entirely disgraced. The mayor held a frantic damage control press conference, announcing the immediate disbandment of the precinct's discretionary fund and begging the Department of Justice for leniency. Leniency was not granted. The DOJ Civil Rights Division, spearheaded by Valerie Stanton, instituted a massive binding federal consent decree over the entire municipal police force. Every officer was mandated to wear unmutable body cameras. Independent federal monitors were installed to review every single traffic stop and use-of-force report. The slush fund was seized, and millions of dollars in stolen assets were meticulously tracked down and returned to the innocent victims Harmon had preyed upon. Robert Becker, owing to his 11th-hour cooperation, avoided prison time but was forced into early retirement. spending his remaining years teaching ethics seminars at the State Police Academy. Gregory Harmon pled guilty to avoid a drawn-out public trial and was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, stripped of his pension and his dignity. High above the bustling streets of Washington, D.C., inside the cavernous, marble-lined halls of the Department of Justice, Valerie Stanton stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling window of her corner office. The afternoon sun cast a warm, golden glow across the polished oak floorboards. She held a cup of Earl Grey tea, watching the tiny cars navigate the chaotic traffic of the Capitol below. Her desk was already piled high with new case files, new civil rights violations, and new battles waiting to be fought. The victory in Crestview Estates was significant, but she knew it was only one small skirmish in an endless, agonizing war against systemic injustice. She took a slow sip of her tea, savoring the quiet warmth. They would keep trying to silence people. They would keep trying to hide behind their badges and their corrupted authority. But Valerie Stanton would be waiting for them, and she was never going to blink. If this story of justice served, systemic corruption dismantled, and undeniable truth brought to light resonated with you, please hit that like button to support the channel. Share this incredible, real-life-inspired drama with your friends and family to keep the conversation about accountability and civil rights alive. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another gripping, high-stakes story of ordinary people standing up against monumental abuses of power. Drop a comment below telling us what you would have done in Valerie's situation. See you in the next video.